Melissa Green stood in the slow-moving line at Lakeside Federal Bank, her envelope clutched tight against her chest like something fragile. At 69, the stiffness in her fingers came and went, but today it felt worse. Maybe from the hours she spent cooking, measuring, and sealing meals for neighbors just to save every last dollar. Her soft gray curls were pinned neatly. Her sweater faded at the elbows, but her posture carried a quiet dignity she refused to lose. Inside that envelope was $1,850. Nearly 7 months of sacrifice. 7 months of selling plates of collard greens and cornbread after church, walking instead of taking rides, cutting every corner she could, just to pay off a medical bill before it drowned her. The bank buzzed with polished shoes and polished people, sharp suits, loud voices, and conversations about investments she'd never heard of. She felt small here, out of place. But she also knew one thing. Her money was honest, earned with tired hands and a determined heart. This moment, standing in a bank with her life savings, should have been simple, but what happened next would change everything. Before we go any further, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. And tell me, have you ever seen someone get disrespected for no reason? Let me know in the comments. When her number blinked onto the screen, Melissa stepped up to the counter with a hopeful smile. The teller's name tag read Chase G, Senior Account Specialist, maybe 30, smug expression, hair gelled into place like he spent more time styling it than she spent preparing dinner for 5 families. Deposit? He asked, picking up her envelope between 2 fingers as if it were damp. Yes, baby, Melissa said softly. Into my checking account, please. But when he looked inside, his expression twisted. All cash. He said it like something dirty. Melissa nodded. I counted it twice. I'm sure you did, he said, louder than necessary. But cash deposits of this size from folks without proper documentation are usually flagged. From folks. The words hit her like a slap. A woman tightened her grip on her purse. A man in a navy suit frowned in her direction. Judgment rippled through the line like a breeze. Melissa's cheeks warmed with embarrassment. Chase spread her bills across the counter. 10s, 5s, 1s, handling each like it personally offended him. And where exactly did you get this amount? He asked. This bank has protocols. Cash like this is unusual. Melissa swallowed. I earned it. I'm paying a medical. Ma'am, he snapped, cutting her off. I'm going to need receipts. Pay stubs. Something that proves this money is legitimate. Her vision blurred. The humiliation washed over her in a wave. 50 years of doing the right thing, and still she was being treated like a criminal, in front of strangers, in a place she'd trusted for decades. Chase pushed the envelope back across the counter. Come back with documentation, he said with a dismissive flick of his hand. You're holding up the line. Melissa's hands trembled as she reached for the envelope, shame burning hot behind her eyes. She turned to leave, tears finally gathering, when a voice cut through the bank like a blade of ice. Did he just talk to you like that? The entire bank froze. A tall man stepped out from the line, broad shoulders filling his black suit, tattoo curling above his collar, jaw clenched with controlled fury. He moved with the kind of unshakable confidence that made people instinctively step aside. His hand, large, steady, inked, rested gently on Melissa's shoulder. Protective, grounding. She didn't know him, but when Chase's face drained of color, when security pretended not to see, when customers suddenly went silent, Melissa understood something important. He wasn't just another customer. He was the wrong man to anger. And humiliating Melissa had just become a very dangerous mistake. Angelo's hand remained steady on Melissa's shoulder, not forceful, but anchored, protective in a way that made her frozen panic begin to thaw. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Process her deposit, Angelo said, each word carved from stone. Now. Chase's smugness evaporated like steam. His eyes darted past Angelo, looking for help that wouldn't come. Security shifted near the entrance, then deliberately turned away. A manager peeked out from the back office and quietly shut the door. I was just following Proto. You were disrespecting her, Angelo interrupted, his tone colder, in front of everyone, making her feel like a criminal for having the audacity to save her own money. Someone whispered his name, Angelo Tancredi. The name rippled to the bank like a current beneath still water. Chase's hands trembled as he reached for the envelope. "Sir, I didn't mean any. You didn't mean to embarrass this woman?" Angelo's jaw tightened. The tattoo above his collar, a coiled serpent, seeming to shift with the tension in his neck. "You didn't mean to treat her like she was beneath you?" Melissa looked up at the stranger beside her. His suit was expensive, perfectly tailored. His presence commanded the room in a way she'd never seen before. And yet his hand on her shoulder was gentle, almost careful. Who was he? Chase fumbled with the bills, counting them twice with shaking fingers. "Of course, Ms. Green," Melissa whispered. "Ms. Green," Chase repeated quickly. "I apologize for any misunderstanding. Your deposit will be processed immediately." Angelo leaned forward slightly. "And—" Chase swallowed. "And I'm sorry, ma'am. Truly, I was out of line." The apology hung in the air, thin, hollow, but there. Melissa blinked back the last of her tears, her dignity slowly reassembling itself like scattered pieces of glass. Within minutes, her deposit was complete. Chase handed her the receipt with both hands, like an offering a piece he didn't deserve to make. Angelo guided her toward the exit, his presence still parting the crowd. Outside, the afternoon sunlight felt too bright, too normal after what had just happened. "Thank you," Melissa said, her voice still unsteady. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't." "You would have walked out with your head high," Angelo said simply, "just like you're doing now." He gestured toward the corner. "Where are you headed?" "Bus stop, 2 blocks down." "I'll walk you." Melissa shook her head, pride flaring despite everything. "Baby, you've done enough. I know you can," Angelo said, a hint of something softer breaking through his controlled exterior. "But I'd like to make sure you get there safely." They walked in silence for half a block before Melissa spoke again. "Why did you do that? You don't even know me." Angelo's jaw flexed. "I know enough. Everyone in there knew you," she said carefully. "Like you were someone important. Someone to be afraid of." He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice carried weight. "I'm someone who doesn't like watching good people get treated like they don't matter." Melissa studied him. The sharp lines of his face, the ink curling at his wrists, the way people had scattered when he moved. She'd lived long enough to recognize danger when she saw it, but she'd also lived long enough to recognize something else. "You remind me of my son," she said quietly. He had that same stubborn loyalty. Angelo's expression flickered, just for a second. "Had lost him 5 years ago. I'm sorry." The bus stop appeared ahead, empty except for a faded bench. Melissa turned to face him, envelope still clutched tight. "I don't know who you are, Mr. Tancredi, but thank you for making me feel like I mattered." "You do matter," Angelo said, and the certainty in his voice made her believe it. She sat down on the bench, expecting him to leave, but he didn't. He stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the street, like a sentinel who'd forgotten he was allowed to walk away. And somewhere in his chest, beneath the armor he'd spent years building, something stirred. Something that refused to let him leave. Not yet. Melissa's apartment sat on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The wallpaper peeled near the ceiling. The floorboards creaked with memory, but everything inside was spotless. Crocheted blankets draped across a worn sofa. Family photos lined the mantel. Her late husband in his Sunday best, her son in a graduation cap, grandchildren she hadn't seen in months. She made herself tea in a chipped mug and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. The envelope from the bank sat on her kitchen table, finally deposited, finally safe. But her mind kept drifting back to the stranger with the dark eyes and the gentle hand on her shoulder. Angelo Tancredi. The name people whispered like a warning. 3 blocks away, Angelo sat in the back of a black sedan. Phone pressed his ear. Melissa Green, he said quietly, third floor apartment on Oakwood. I want to know if she's safe. If she needs anything. His lieutenant, Marco, hesitated. Boss, you don't usually. Just do it. Angelo ended the call and stared out at the city lights blurring past. He could explain why she'd gotten under his skin, why he kept seeing the way her hands had trembled, the way she refused to crumble, even when the world tried to make her feel small. And then the memory hit him, sharp and uninvited. 23 years ago, Angelo had been 14, standing in the doorway of his aunt's kitchen. Aunt Rose, his father's sister, the only person in his broken family who'd ever looked at him like he mattered. She'd been making soup, always making something for someone. Angelo, baby, she'd said, stirring the pot with hands gnarled from arthritis. You remember this. Dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you carry inside, no matter how the world treats you. She'd smiled at him, tired, worn down by life, but still standing. You protect that in yourself. And when you're strong enough, you protect it in others. 3 months later, she was gone. Heart attack while walking home from the church where she volunteered every Saturday. Angelo had been too young to save her, too powerless to protect the one person who'd ever made him feel like more than the violent legacy his father left behind. But Melissa had the same grace, the same stubborn dignity his aunt had carried like armor. And this time, he wasn't powerless. For days later, Melissa stood at the counter of Lakeside Community Church's kitchen, ladling stew into styrofoam containers. Steam rose around her as she worked, sleeves rolled up, apron tied snug, surrounded by other volunteers chatting and laughing. This was where she felt most like herself. Useful, needed, part of something bigger than her own struggles. Miss Melissa? She turned and froze. Angelo Tancredi stood in the doorway, looking impossibly out of place in his tailored black coat and polished shoes. The other volunteers went quiet, eyes widening with recognition. Mr. Tancredi, Melissa said carefully, wiping her hands on her apron. What are you doing here? He stepped closer, hands in his pockets. I wanted to see how you were. I'm fine, baby. You didn't have to. And I made a donation, he added, to the church, for the kitchen. Melissa blinked. A donation? Pastor Williams appeared from the office, beaming. Ms. Green, Mr. Tancredi just wrote us a check for $15,000. Anonymous, he says, but I wanted to thank him personally. Melissa's breath caught. $15,000. Enough to keep the kitchen running for months. Angelo met her eyes. It's nothing. It's everything, she whispered. They sat together on the church steps 20 minutes later, the evening air cool against their skin. Melissa held a cup of coffee Angelo had insisted on buying from the shop across the street. He didn't have one for himself, just sat beside her, listening. My husband used to say the same thing your aunt did, Melissa said softly. That dignity is a right, not a privilege. He worked construction for 37 years. Came home every night with sore hands and a straight back. Angelo watched her face, the way it softened when she spoke about him. He taught our son that too. To stand tall, to treat people right. Her voice wavered. Lost them both within 3 years of each other. I'm sorry, Angelo said and meant it. Melissa turned to him. Why are you really here, Mr. Tancredi? He was quiet for a long moment. Because you remind me, he finally said, that some things are worth protecting. She studied him, this dangerous man with the soft eyes and a heavy past. You're not what people say you are, she said. Maybe I am, Angelo replied, but not with you. Across town, in a dimly lit bar where loyalty was bought and sold like currency, 2 men leaned over drinks. Angelo Tancredi, one muttered, getting soft. Seemed protecting some old lady at a bank. The other man smiled, a sharp, predatory thing. Then maybe, he said slowly, it's time we reminded him what happens when you show weakness in the city. He raised his glass. To old enemies and new opportunities. The Grandview Hotel ballroom glittered like something from a dream Melissa had never dared to have. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across marble floors. Women in gowns that cost more than her yearly rent glided past tables draped in silk. Men in tuxedos laughed over glasses of champagne that probably cost what she made in a week. Melissa adjusted her white serving apron and picked up another tray of hors d'oeuvres. The catering agency had called her yesterday, short-staffed for a last-minute charity gala. $50 an hour. She'd said yes before they finished the sentence. She wove through the crowd, offering smoked salmon and endive cups to people who barely noticed she existed. This was fine. She was used to being invisible until she walked past the main staircase and saw him. Angelo Tancredi stood at the center of a circle of men in expensive suits, his presence commanding the space like gravity. His black tuxedo fit him perfectly, the crisp white shirt making the tattoo at his collar seem even darker. People approached him with deference, with fear dressed up as respect. Their eyes met across the room. His expression shifted, surprise, then something softer. He excused himself and walked straight toward her. "Ms. Green," he said quietly, genuine concern in his voice. "What are you doing here?" Melissa lifted her tray, slightly. "Working, baby. Same as always." Angelo's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have to." "I want to," she said firmly. "Keeps me useful." He looked like he wanted to argue but didn't. Instead, he glanced around the ballroom. At the wealth, the excess, the performance of charity that will be forgotten by morning. "I hate these things," he admitted. "Then why come?" "Appearances," Angelo said simply. "Sometimes power means showing up where people expect you." A woman in diamonds called his name from across the room. "I should go," he said. "But if you need anything—" "I'll be fine," Melissa assured him. He nodded slowly, then returned to crowd. But something in his posture had changed. He kept glancing toward the kitchen doors. An hour later, Melissa stood in the service kitchen, refilling her tray beside two younger servers who were gossiping about which billionaire was drunkest. The door swung open. Angelo stepped inside, loosening his bow tie like it had been strangling him. "Mr. Tancredi," Melissa said, surprised. "You lost." "Needed air," he said, "or whatever passes for in a room that fake." She smiled despite herself. "You don't seem like the charity gala type." "I'm not." He leaned against the counter, and for a moment he looked almost normal, almost like a man who hadn't been raised in violence. "How's the church kitchen?" "Thriving, thanks to someone's generous donation." "Good." The other servers had gone still, watching this powerful man talk to an elderly catering worker like she mattered more than everyone in the ballroom combined. "You know," Melissa said softly, "I've been trying to figure you out. And I think you're someone who forgot he's allowed to be kind." Angelo's expression flickered, something vulnerable breaking through before he could stop it, before he could respond. The lights went out. The ballroom plunged into darkness. Screams erupted, sharp and panicked. Then came the gunshots. 3 quick cracks that turned the chaos into terror. The kitchen door exploded open and Angelo moved. 1 second he was beside Melissa. The next he'd shoved her behind the industrial refrigerator, his body a shield between her and whatever was coming. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice stripped of warmth. "Don't move." The man from the church steps was gone. This was someone else entirely. Through the crack between the refrigerator and the wall, Melissa watched Angelo pull a gun from inside his jacket. Smooth, practiced, terrifying in its efficiency. The ballroom doors burst open. Armed men in black tactical gear poured through. 4, 5, 6 of them, assault rifles raised. Everyone on the ground. One shouted. More screams. Then Angelo's men moved. They came from everywhere, hidden among the guests, the waitstaff, the shadows. Marco, the lieutenant Melissa had seen at the church, appeared beside Angelo with military precision. Others fanned out, weapons drawn, moving like a choreographed dance of violence. "Cover the exits," Angelo said, his voice cold steel. "Nobody gets to the civilians." Gunfire erupted. Melissa pressed her hands over her ears, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched Angelo move through the chaos like death itself. Calculated, efficient, absolutely lethal. He fired twice. Two attackers dropped. He didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. This was his world. A world she glimpsed but never truly understood until now. One of the attackers made it through, charging toward the kitchen, weapon raised. Angelo turned, aimed, and fired in one fluid motion. The man collapsed 3 feet from where Melissa was hidden. Angelo was at her side instantly, checking her for injuries, his hand surprisingly gentle despite the violence still crackling through the air. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Melissa." His voice softened just slightly. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. Outside, the sound of fighting faded. Sirens wailed in the distance. Angelo's men had secured the ballroom. The attackers were down or fleeing. Guests huddled together, sobbing, traumatized, but alive. Angelo helped Melissa to her feet, his hand steady on her arm. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth she'd been avoiding. The man who defended her dignity at a bank. The man who donated to her church. The man who'd sat on those steps and listened like her words mattered. He was also a killer, a commander of killers. Someone whose world was built on violence she couldn't even imagine. "I should get you home," Angelo said quietly. Melissa pulled her arm away, stepping back. "Who are you?" she whispered. Angelo's expression hardened. "You know who I am." "No," she said, voice trembling. "I thought I did, but this—" She gestured at the ballroom, at the bodies, at the aftermath of war. "This is who I am," Angelo said flatly. "This is what I do." Melissa's hands shook as she removed her apron. "I need to leave. I'll have someone drive you." "No." She met his eyes, and something in hers made him stop. "I need to leave. Alone." Angelo watched her walk toward the service exit, every instinct screaming at him to follow, to protect, to explain. But he didn't, because she was right. She'd stepped into his world, and his world only knew how to destroy. Angelo's hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Finally, Melissa spoke. "What are you?" "Not who. What?" Melissa had said she wanted to leave alone, but Angelo couldn't let her. His black Mercedes idled at the service entrance, Marco standing guard while Angelo waited. When Melissa finally emerged, coat pulled tight, eyes hollow, she stopped at the sight of him. "I said no," she whispered. "I know what you said." Angelo opened the passenger door. "But I'm not letting you take a bus at midnight after what just happened. Please." The word, please, from a man who commanded with absolute authority, made her hesitate. She got in. The drive was silent for the first 10 minutes. City lights blurred past. The streets were quiet, oblivious to the violence that had erupted just blocks away. Angelo's jaw tightened. "Melissa?" "Those men knew you," she continued, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "Your men move like soldiers, like they'd done this before, like it was normal." She turned to face him. "So I'm asking again, what are you?" Angelo pulled the car to the curb 2 blocks from her apartment and killed the engine. For a long moment, he just sat there. "I'm involved in things," he said carefully, "that you shouldn't be anywhere near." "What kind of things?" "The kind that get people hurt. The kind that—" He stopped, exhaling slowly. "The kind that follow you home if you're not careful." Melissa's hands twisted in her lap. "Are you a criminal?" Angelo met her eyes. "By some definitions." "By the law's definition?" "Yes." The word hung between them like smoke. Melissa looked away, staring out at the darkened street. "The man at the bank, he was terrified of you. He should have been. The people at the gala, they all knew. They all feared you." "That's how I stay alive," Angelo said quietly. "And how I keep the people I care about safe." "Safe?" Melissa's voice cracked. "Those men came there to kill you, and I was standing right next to you." Angelo flinched. "I know." "Do you?" She turned back to him, and for the first time, he saw real fear in her eyes. Not of him, but of what being near him meant. "Because I'm 69 years old, Mr. Tancredi. I've survived poverty, widowhood, burying my son. I did not survive all that just to get caught in someone else's war. The words hit harder than any bullet. You're right, Angelo said, his voice rough. You shouldn't be near me. I'll make sure you're not followed, that you're protected from a distance, but I don't want your protection, Melissa said softly. I want my life back. Angelo nodded slowly, something breaking behind his carefully controlled expression. I understand. He drove her the rest of the way in silence. When they reached her building, Melissa paused with her hand on the door handle. I'm grateful, she said, not looking at him, for what you did at the bank, for the donation, for seeing me when others didn't. She finally met his eyes. But I can't be part of this, whatever this is. I know, Angelo said. She got out. He watched her climb the steps to her building, shoulders square despite everything, dignity intact even as she walked away from him. When she disappeared inside, Angelo sat in the darkness for a long time. Then he made a call. Marco, I want surveillance on Melissa Green's building. Discreet. 24 hours. If anyone even looks at her wrong, I want to know about it. Boss, if you're trying to distance yourself, just do it. Angelo ended the call and drove into the night, away from her, but unable to truly let go. Across town, Vincent Arlotta swirled whiskey in a crystal glass, studying the photographs spread across his mahogany desk. Melissa Green at the bank, Angelo's hand on her shoulder. Melissa Green at the gala, Angelo shielding her during the attack. Vincent smiled. A cold, calculating thing. How long has Tancredi had this weakness? He asked a man standing across from him. 2 weeks, maybe 3. The man replied. Started after the bank incident. And she's nobody? Just some old woman. Far as we can tell. Lives alone. Works at a church kitchen. No family to speak of. Vincent leaned back in his chair. Angelo Tancredi doesn't protect nobodies. He doesn't show up at charity galas and throw himself in front of gunfire for strangers. He tapped one of the photos, Melissa's face, kind and unaware. She means something to him. So, what do we do? Vincent's smile widened. We remind Angelo what happens when you show weakness in this city. He lifted his glass. We take what he cares about. 3 days later, Melissa stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes from dinner, trying to convince herself everything was normal. She hadn't seen Angelo since that night, hadn't heard from him. That was good. That was what she wanted. But as she dried her hands and moved to close the curtains, something caught her eye. A black sedan, parked across the street. Same one that had been there yesterday. And the day before, her stomach tightened. The next morning, walking to the bus stop, she felt again, eyes on her back. She turned quickly. A man in a gray jacket looked away too fast. At the grocery store that afternoon, she saw him again. Different jacket, same face. Melissa's hands shook as she paid for her groceries. She wasn't imagining this. Someone was watching her. And deep down, in a place that made her chest ache with something she didn't want to name, she knew why. Being kind to Angelo Tancredi had put a target on her back. And now she was in a war she never asked to fight. The church meeting had run late. Melissa buttoned her coat against the October chill, her breath misting in the air as she descended the stone steps. The parking lot was nearly empty. Just her and Pastor Williams's old sedan in the dim glow of a single streetlight. Need a ride, Miss Green? The pastor called from his car window. No, baby. The bus comes in 10 minutes. I'll be fine. She waved him off with a smile she perfected over decades. The one that said, don't worry about me. I've survived worse. His taillights disappeared around the corner. Melissa started walking toward the bus stop, her purse clutched tight. The van came out of nowhere. It screeched to a stop beside her. Doors flew open. Hands, rough, violent, grabbed her arms, her shoulders. She tried to scream, but a gloved hand clamped over her mouth, cutting off her air. Quiet, old lady, a voice hissed. She kicked, fought, but at 69, against 3 grown men, her resistance meant nothing. They threw her into the van like a bag of groceries. The world went dark as something struck the back of her head. When Melissa woke, pain bloomed sharp behind her eyes. She was sitting in a metal chair, her wrists bound behind her with zip ties that cut into her skin. The room was vast and hollow, a warehouse, she realized, abandoned, cold concrete floors, broken windows high above let in slivers of moonlight. 3 men stood in front of her, wearing dark clothes and expressions that made her blood run cold. "She's awake," one said, nudging her foot with his boot. Melissa lifted her head, refusing to let them see her fear. "Where am I?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Somewhere Angelo Tancredi's going to have to work real hard to find," the tallest one said, grinning. "If he even bothers looking for a nobody like you." "I don't know what you want." "We don't want you," another interrupted. Crouching down to her eye level. "You're just a bait, Grandma. Tancredi's been getting soft. Protecting old church ladies now." He laughed. "That's going to cost him." The door at the far end of the warehouse opened. Footsteps echoed across the concrete. Slow, deliberate, expensive shoes clicking with authority. Vincent Arlotta emerged from the shadows wearing a charcoal suit and a smile that belonged on something predatory. "Ms. Green," he said smoothly, as if they were meeting at a dinner party. "I apologize for the accommodations, but you understand business is business." Melissa said nothing. Vincent circled her chair, hands clasped behind his back. "You become quite important to Angelo. Did you know that? A man who hasn't cared about anyone in 15 years, suddenly playing hero for a woman he met in a bank." He stopped in front of her. "That's exploitable." "I don't mean anything to him," Melissa said firmly. "Then why does he have men watching your apartment? Why did he shield you during an attack?" Vincent smiled. "You mean something, Ms. Green, and that makes you valuable." One of the men handed Vincent a phone on a small tripod. "Now," Vincent said, positioning it to frame Melissa in the shot, "we're going to send Angelo a message." He hit record. The red light blinked on. "Angelo," Vincent said to the camera, his voice cold and businesslike, "you've been expanding into territory that doesn't belong to you, disrupting arrangements that have stood for years. So here's how this works." He gestured to Melissa. "You have 48 hours to pull your operations out of the South Harbor District. Completely. Or Ms. Green here becomes another casualty of your arrogance." He leaned closer to the camera. "Your choice, Angelo. Territory or her life." Vincent stopped the recording and pocketed the phone. "Please," Melissa said quietly. "I'm nobody. I don't know anything about his business. I'm just the only person who made him feel something," Vincent interrupted. "That's enough." He turned to his men. "Keep her alive. Comfortable enough. Angelo needs to believe there's something to save." They left her alone in the darkness. Melissa closed her eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs. Should she cry? Should she break down? Should she beg God for a miracle? But she'd spent 69 years surviving things that should have broken her. So instead, she prayed silently, calm, steady, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her tears. If this was the end, she'd face it the same way she'd faced everything else, with dignity. Across the city, Angelo stood in his office, staring at his phone screen. The video had arrived 10 minutes ago. He'd watched it 7 times. Each time, the rage built higher. Marco stood by the door, silent, waiting. "How?" Angelo's voice was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that preceded violence. "We don't know yet. The surveillance team lost their signal after the church. They're..." Angelo hurled his glass across the room. It exploded against the wall, whiskey and shattered crystal raining down. "They lost her." His voice rose to a roar. "I had 4 men on that location." "Boss!" "Get them in here. Now!" Marco moved fast, making calls, barking orders. Within minutes, the surveillance team stood in Angelo's office, heads bowed. Angelo looked at each of them with eyes so cold they could freeze blood. "You had one job," he said, his voice lethal. "Keep her safe. And now Vincent Arlotta has her in a warehouse, somewhere, tied to a chair, using her as leverage against me. One of the men opened his mouth to explain. Angelo's fist connected with his jaw before he could speak. The man dropped. "I don't want excuses," Angelo said to the others. "I want a location. I want every resource we have on this. Every contact. Every favor owed. I want Vincent's entire operation torn apart until someone tells me where she is." He turned to Marco, and his lieutenant had never seen such raw fury in his boss's eyes. "And when we find her," Angelo said, his voice dropping to something deadly, "I want Vincent Arlotta to understand what happens when you touch what's mine." Marco nodded. "Consider it done, sir." The room emptied, everyone moving with purpose and fear. Angelo stood alone, staring at the frozen frame of Melissa on his phone, bound, scared, but somehow still unbroken. He'd tried to walk away, tried to protect her by staying distant, and now she was paying the price for his weakness. "I'm coming," he whispered to the image. "I promise." Outside, the city held its breath, because when Angelo Tancredi lost control, people died, and tonight he was done holding back. The warehouse had been silent for hours. Melissa sat in that metal chair, zip ties biting into her wrists, praying in whispers that echoed off concrete walls. Her captors had left 2 guards, young men playing cards near the entrance, their rifles leaned carelessly against a crate. They thought she was powerless. They thought Angelo wouldn't come. They were wrong on both counts. The first sound was glass shattering. High windows exploded inward, raining shards onto the warehouse floor. The guards jumped to their feet, scrambling for weapons. Too slow. Smoke grenades hissed through the broken windows, flooding the space with thick gray fog. Then came the gunfire. Precise, controlled, deadly. Melissa couldn't see through the smoke, but she heard everything. The sharp cracks of rifles, shouted commands, bodies hitting concrete. The chaos lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then silence. Footsteps approached through the haze. Multiple sets, moving with military precision. A figure emerged from the smoke like vengeance itself. Angelo, his black tactical gear, made him look like something carved from night. Blood spattered his face and knuckles. His jaw was set, eyes burning with a fury that made him almost unrecognizable. The serpent tattoo at his collar seemed alive in the dim light, coiling with each breath. Behind him, Marco and 6 other men fanned out, securing the perimeter, checking bodies. But Angelo only had eyes for Melissa. He dropped to one knee in front of her, pulling a knife from his belt. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, barely controlled. Melissa shook her head, unable to speak. Angelo cut through the zip ties in one swift motion. Her hands fell free, numb and aching. Before she could move, he was checking her, examining her wrists, the back of her head where they'd struck her, searching for injuries with hands that trembled despite their violence moments before. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I'm okay." "Boss," Marco called from across the warehouse. "We got movement upstairs." Angelo's expression hardened. He looked at one of his men. "Get her out. Now." "No," Melissa said, finding her voice. "Don't leave me." "I'll be right behind you," Angelo promised, his tone softening just for her. "But I need to finish this." The man, young, respectful, helped Melissa to her feet and guided her toward the exit. As they reached the door, Melissa looked back. Angelo was already moving, up the metal stairs to the second level where more of Arlotta's men waited. His movements were fluid, precise, terrifying in their efficiency. She heard the gunfire even after they got her outside. 15 minutes earlier, Angelo had moved through the warehouse like death incarnate. The first guard never saw him coming. One moment he was checking his phone. The next, Angelo's hand was around his throat, slamming him into the wall with enough force to crack concrete. The man dropped unconscious. The second guard managed to raise his weapon. Angelo was faster. He closed the distance in 3 strides, deflected the rifle barrel, and drove his elbow into the man's face. Bone crunched. The guard crumpled. Clear. Angelo set into his comms. His team poured in, a coordinated assault that left no room for resistance. They moved like shadows, neutralizing threats before Arlotta's men could even understand they were under attack. Angelo took point, leading them deeper into the warehouse. When he saw Melissa, bound to that chair, her gray curls disheveled, her sweater torn at the shoulder, something primal ignited in his chest. The last guard upstairs made the fatal mistake of standing between Angelo and his exit. "Boss, I can—" the man started. Angelo didn't let him finish. He moved with controlled fury, a strike to the throat, a knee to the ribs, finishing with a brutal efficiency that left no doubt about the outcome. The guard collapsed, gasping. Angelo stood over him, breathing hard, knuckles bleeding. "Tell Arlotta," Angelo said, his voice cold as winter, "that this is just the beginning." 2 hours later, Melissa sat in Angelo's penthouse, wrapped in a blanket, hands around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. The place was nothing like she'd imagined, modern, yes, but not ostentatious. Books lined one wall, soft lighting, a warmth that seemed at odds with the man who lived here. Angelo emerged from the bathroom, his face clean to blood, wearing a simple black T-shirt that revealed the full extent of his tattoos, intricate designs that covered both arms, disappearing beneath the fabric. He sat across from her, keeping distance, as if afraid she'd break if he came closer. "Vincent Arlotta is gone," he said quietly. "His entire operation. Every lieutenant, every asset, every safe house. It's over." Melissa looked at him. "Did you kill him?" Angelo's expression was unreadable. "No, but he's on a container ship to Eastern Europe with nothing but the clothes on his back. He won't be coming back. And his men, some ran, some didn't." Angelo leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I'm sorry. This happened because of me, because I was selfish enough to—" "To what?" Melissa interrupted. "To show me kindness? To defend me when no one else would. To put you in danger," Angelo said firmly. "To make you a target." Melissa set down her tea and stood. Her legs were steadier now. She walked over to where Angelo sat and did something that surprised them both. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "You saved my life," she said softly. Angelo looked up at her, and for the first time since the bank, she saw past the armor, saw the boy who'd lost his aunt, saw the man who built walls so high he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. "You matter," she said, echoing his words from weeks ago. "You matter to me." Something in Angelo's carefully controlled expression cracked. He covered her hand with his, the same hand that had delivered violence just hours before, now gentle and uncertain. "You shouldn't have had to go through that," he whispered. "But I did," Melissa said, "and you came for me. That's what I'll remember." They stood like that for a long moment. Survivor and savior, unlikely pair bound by violence, and something deeper neither was ready to name. Outside, the city slept, unaware that a war had been waged and won in a single night. Inside, two souls who'd found each other in the worst circumstances began the slow work of healing. Together, morning light filtered to the penthouse windows, painting everything gold. Melissa had slept in the guest room, the first real sleep she'd had in days. When she emerged, still wearing the clothes Angelo's housekeeper had laid out for her, she found him standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows. Staring out at the city, he turned at the sound of her footsteps. "Coffee's ready," he said, gesturing to the kitchen, "and I made breakfast, or tried to." Melissa smiled despite everything. "You cook?" "Not well," Angelo admitted, "but I figured you shouldn't have to." They sat at the kitchen island. Scrambled eggs that were slightly overdone, toast that was slightly burnt, coffee that was perfect. It felt strangely normal, until Angelo slid a manila folder across the counter. "What's this?" Melissa asked. "A way out," Angelo said quietly. "New identity, new city, witness protection arranged through contacts who owe me favors. $25,000 to start fresh." He paused. "A life where nobody knows your name or your connection to me." Melissa stared at the folder like it was a snake. "You want me to disappear." "I want you to be safe," Angelo corrected. Vincent is gone, but there are others. My enemies don't forget. And now he stopped, jaw tightening. You're a vulnerability I can't afford, and a target you don't deserve to be. Melissa pushed the folder back across the counter. No. Angelo blinked. Melissa? I said no. Her voice was firm. I'm 69 years old. I've built a life in this city. My church, my community, the people I feed every Saturday, that's who I am. I'm not abandoning them because dangerous men exist. This isn't about danger, Angelo said, frustration bleeding into his tone. This is about survival. You could start over. Be anyone. Go anywhere. I don't want to be anyone, Melissa said. I want to be me. In my home. Living the life I chose. She met his eyes. I'm not running, Angelo. He stood, pacing to the window, hands clenched at his sides. Then you're asking me to let you stay in danger. I'm asking you to tell me the truth, Melissa said. The whole truth. No more half answers or vague explanations. If I'm staying in this, wherever this is, I need to know exactly who you are. Angelo was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to face her. My name is Angelo Tancredi, he began, voice steady but stripped of pretense. I run the Tancredi organization, one of the 5 major crime families in this city. We control the docks, construction unions, some legitimate businesses, and several that aren't. He paused. I inherited it when I was 23 after my father was killed. Since then, I've built an empire on fear, violence, and power. Melissa listened without interrupting. I've ordered people killed, Angelo continued, the words coming harder now. I've destroyed lives, ruined families. I'm not a good man, Melissa. I'm the kind of man your son probably arrested when he was alive. The kind pastors warn their congregations about. He met her eyes, expecting judgment. Instead, she asked, Why? The question caught him off guard. Why what? Why did you build it? Melissa said gently, The empire, the fear. Why did you become this? Angelo's jaw worked. Because it was the only way to survive. My father's enemies would have torn me apart if I'd shown weakness. So I became stronger, harder, meaner than all of them combined. And your Aunt Rose? Melissa asked softly, What would she think of what you became? The name hit him like a physical blow. Angelo turned away, hands gripping the window frame. She'd be ashamed, he whispered. I don't think so, Melissa said. She stood, walking over to stand beside him. I think she'd see what I see. And what's that? A man who's lost, Melissa said. Not hopeless, not beyond saving. Just lost, walking a path he inherited instead of chose. Angelo laughed, but it was hollow. You're giving me too much credit. And you're giving yourself too little. Melissa countered. You defended a stranger in a bank. You donated to a church kitchen. You risked everything to save someone who means nothing to your empire. She touched his arm gently. That's not a lost cause, baby. That's a man who still knows what's right. Angelo closed his eyes, something breaking open in his chest. Something he kept locked away for decades. You shouldn't forgive me this easily, he said, voice rough. I'm not forgiving you, Melissa said. I'm seeing you. There's a difference. They stood in silence, the city sprawling below them. Finally, Angelo spoke. If you stay, he said carefully, you'll be under my protection. Always. But not as a prisoner, not as leverage, as someone who, he struggled for words, as someone who matters to me. Melissa considered this. I'll stay, she said, on one condition. Angelo looked at her. You let me help you change things, Melissa said firmly. I don't expect you to become a saint overnight, but if I'm going to be part of your life, then my values are part of it too. That means no more innocent people getting hurt. No more using fear when respect would work. No more being the kind of man your aunt would be ashamed of. Angelo stared at her. The 69-year-old woman who'd survived poverty, loss, and kidnapping, now standing in his penthouse demanding he be better. And somehow, impossibly, he wanted to try. Deal, he said quietly. Melissa smiled, the same warm, dignified smile she'd worn in that bank line weeks ago. Then I guess we're doing this. I guess we are, Angelo agreed. Outside, the city woke up to a new day. Inside, two unlikely souls began the work of building something neither thought possible. Not redemption. Not yet, but maybe, just maybe, a path toward it. 3 months later, the Tancredi Community Center opened on a cold November morning. It sat in the heart of South Harbor, the same district Angelo had fought Vincent Arlotta over. But instead of protection rackets and intimidation, the building now housed a food bank, after-school programs, and a senior care facility. Melissa stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, scissors in hand, surrounded by children and elderly neighbors who'd once been too afraid to walk these streets after dark. Angelo stood behind her, hands in the pockets of his black coat, watching with an expression that had become familiar over the past few months. Pride, disbelief, something softer he didn't have words for. When Melissa cut the ribbon, the crowd cheered. She looked back at Angelo and smiled. He nodded once, his version of applause. The changes had been subtle at first. A donation here, a protection detail for a struggling grocery store there. But Melissa hadn't been subtle. "You want my respect?" she'd said during one of their early morning coffee conversations. "Then earn it, not through fear, through action." So Angelo had listened. Food drives organized through his distribution network. Elderly residents given free security escorts. Abandoned buildings renovated into community spaces. Instead of being used for less legal purposes, his lieutenants had been confused. Marco had raised an eyebrow. His rivals had watched, waiting for the trap. But there was no trap, just an elderly woman who was stronger than steel, slowly reshaping an empire from the inside. "Boss," Marco had said one day, shaking his head, "you know people are calling you soft?" Angelo had looked up from the paperwork Melissa had asked him to review. Grant applications for youth programs. "Let them," he'd said simply. The news came on a Wednesday afternoon. Melissa was in Angelo's penthouse kitchen, making collard greens, a recipe she promised to teach his housekeeper. The television played quietly in the background. Federal authorities arrested Chase Gunderson, a senior account specialist at Lakeside Federal Bank, on multiple charges including embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud. According to the FBI, Melissa stopped stirring. On screen, Chase was being let out of the bank in handcuffs, head down, cameras flashing. The same smug expression from months ago was gone, replaced by shame. Angelo appeared in the doorway, phone in hand. "Did you?" Melissa started. "I made some calls," Angelo said. "Asked some questions." Turns out Chase had been skimming from accounts for years, mostly from people he thought wouldn't notice. Elderly customers, immigrants, people he looked down on. He walked over, leaning against the counter. The FBI had been building a case, but they needed a push. "I provided clarity." Melissa turned off the stove and faced him. "You did that for me." "I did that because he deserved it," Angelo corrected. "And because no one disrespects you. Not while I'm alive." The words hung in the air, a promise, a vow, something deeper than protection. Melissa smiled quietly, returning to her cooking. "Good," she said simply. A few days later, Melissa sat in a leather chair in Angelo's private office at his headquarters, a space that had once been reserved for mob business and violent negotiations. Now, she occupied it 3 afternoons a week, reviewing charity proposals and community requests. She sipped tea from a delicate china cup, her own, brought from home because Angelo's assistant had asked what kind she preferred. Across the room, Angelo stood by the window, phone pressed his ear. "I don't care what Moretti thinks," he said, voice cold and commanding. "The waterfront development goes through legitimate channels now. No shortcuts, no bribes. If he has a problem with that, tell him to call me directly." He ended the call and turned to find Melissa watching him. "What?" he asked. "You sounded almost legal just then," she teased. Angelo's mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile most people ever saw from him. "Don't get used to it," he said, but there was no bite in his tone. He walked over and sat in the chair across from her, the same way they'd sat in his penthouse kitchen that first morning. Two people from different worlds, finding common ground. The senior center on Elm Street needs more funding, Melissa said, sliding a file across the desk. Heating systems failing. They got 40 residents who will freeze this winter if we don't help. Angelo opened the file, scanning the numbers. Done, he said. I'll have Marco arrange it. And the youth basketball program. Already approved, Angelo interrupted. Saw the request this morning. Melissa set down her teacup, studying him. You're getting good at this. I have a good teacher, Angelo said quietly outside the office. His organization ran with the same efficiency it always had. People still feared Angelo Tancredi, still stepped aside when he entered a room, still whispered his name like a warning. But now, beneath the fear, something else was growing. Respect. Real respect. The kind earned through actions, not violence. Marco knocked and entered. Boss, the suppliers are here to... He stopped, seeing Melissa. Sorry, Ms. Green. Didn't mean to interrupt. You're not interrupting, baby, Melissa said warmly. How's your daughter? Still enjoying those art classes? Marco blinked. Surprised she remembered. Yes, ma'am. She loves them. Thank you for asking. After Marco left, Angelo shook his head. You've got my entire organization saying please and thank you now. As they should, Melissa said. Manners cost nothing. Angelo laughed, a real laugh, rare and genuine. They sat in comfortable silence, the unlikely pair. A crime lord and a grandmother, a man built from violence and a woman built from grace. Neither should have worked, but somehow impossibly they did. Angelo? Melissa said after a moment. Yeah. Thank you, she said, for listening, for changing, for letting me be part of this. Angelo met her eyes, the same eyes that had looked at him with fear in a warehouse, then forgiveness in his penthouse, and now with something that felt dangerously close to family. Thank you, he said, for seeing me when no one else did. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that in a penthouse office, over tea and business calls, two souls had found what they'd both been missing. Not redemption. Not yet, but the beginning of it. And for now, that was enough. If this story touched you, hit like, and make sure you're subscribed for more powerful stories just like this.